Near Newcastle Upon Tyne, in the northeast of England, there once existed Willington Mill and Mill House. The mill and house were built around 1805, and in the 1830s and 40s, a haunting occurred at Willington Mill. The haunting caused a sensation, but has now been all but forgotten. Although the mill house stood next to the mill, it was separated by a road and was originally lived in by a man called Joseph Unthanks and his family, who owned the mill with a Joseph Proctor Sr. and a man called William Brown. William Brown later left the business, and Joseph Proctor Sr. died in 1813. Proctor's son, Joseph Jr., then joined the business. The Unthanks and Proctor families were cousins and Quaker businessmen. The house was typical of early 19th century domestic architecture, which had 3 floors and an attic area above. The Unthank family lived there until 1831, when Joseph Unthank retired. In 1831, Joseph Proctor married Elizabeth Carr from Kendal in Cumbria and took up residence at the mill house while they started a family. Around January 1835, Joseph Proctor decided to keep a diary to record accounts of hauntings that were occurring. Proctor wrote that it began with footsteps in an empty room that lasted for 2 months. Then a nursemaid, who was employed to look after the children, heard someone pacing back and forth in the room above the nursery on the 3rd floor. So forceful were the steps that they even rattled the window frames in the nursery. This happened every evening and lasted for about 10 minutes. The strange noises steadily grew until she became convinced that the noise was supernatural in origin and reported it to her mistress. The girl left the house soon after, terrified by her experiences. The loud noises got the attention of Elizabeth Proctor, where at 11 a.m. one morning when she was in the nursery, she too heard a heavy thump in the room above. When a new nursemaid arrived, they did not tell her why the previous nursemaid had left, but in a very short time she too heard the loud noises and became terrified by the sound of heavy boots walking up and down in the room above the nursery. But each time the room was inspected, nothing was found and the room was empty. Weirdly, even though a thick layer of dust covered the floor, the dust had not been disturbed by any footprints. The room where the noises were taking place became known as the disturbed room. An unusual feature of the room is that for some reason the door had once been nailed shut, and it was only recently that the nails had been removed. However, the window and fireplace had also been boarded up, and there was no access to the roof. It is not known why the room was sealed, and who eventually unsealed it. The previous tenants, the Unthanks, only occupied 1 floor of the house while they resided there, and it is not known whether they knew about the disturbances or whether it was they who sealed or unsealed it, or whether Joseph Proctor had unsealed it, and by opening the door have released something that should have remained sealed up. Before long, all members of the house became involved with the terrifying phenomena that emanated from the disturbed room. Then things got worse. In early 1835, Joseph Proctor's diary stated that he and his wife's sleep was violently disturbed by what sounded like a mallet hitting a block of wood 10 or 12 times very close to them. The following evening, as he was putting his son in his crib, he described hearing indistinct noises coming from the room above. Then suddenly a metallic sound tapped on the cradle, causing it to vibrate. It appears that whatever had once been confined to the disturbed room had now got out and was now haunting the rest of the house, and in turn terrifying the residents. Thomas Mann was a foreman of the mill and had been working the night shift tending to the engine at the mill. Around 1 a.m. he was in the yard collecting coal and heard a loud grating sound on the cobblestone path. The mill had a wooden cistern on wheels that was used to bring water to the mill horses, and Mann felt certain that someone was trying to steal the cistern and hurried over expecting to catch a thief, but found nothing and the yard was empty. He later described the incident to Proctor and felt certain the incident was supernatural. Proctor noted in his diary that he would often hear disembodied footsteps on the gravel path outside. Joseph Proctor was certain that something strange was happening in his house and decided to contact his cousin, Joseph Unthanks, and in February 1835 wrote, My wife and I were informed by our cousin Unthanks that they understood that the house, and that room in particular in which the noises now occurred, was said to be haunted before they entered it in 1806, but that nothing they knew of had been heard during their occupancy of 25 years. There is no response in Proctor's diary as to his response to what Unthanks had said or whether he had believed him, but he was not deterred by what he had said and sought to find out the cause as to why his house was haunted, and wrote the following. An infirm old woman, the mother-in-law of R. Oxon, the builder of the premises, lived and died in the house, and after her death is where the haunting was attributed to. The disturbances continued, and throughout 1835, the family and visitors continued to experience strange phenomena on a daily basis. Whatever was disturbing them was evolving from bangs and footsteps to full apparitions. In November 1835, a neighbour had seen a transparent white female figure in a window on the second story of the house. The following incident was reported. Early in the evening, two of the children, one aged 8 and the other under 2 years, both saw an object which could not be real, which went into the room where the apparition was afterwards seen, and disappeared there. In November, Elizabeth Proctor's sister, Christiana Wright, was visiting and chose to stay with the foreman, Thomas Mann, and his family to avoid the disturbances, but it made no difference, and the following incident occurred about 9:30 p.m. Soon after going to her bedroom, Mrs. Mann's wife went out of the house for some coals and saw a figure in the window like the neighbours had previously described. Mrs. Mann called her husband, daughter and Christiana Wright to observe the apparition. The figure passed backwards and forwards and then stood still in the window. It was very luminous and transparent and had the appearance of a priest in a white surplice. It remained in the window for about 10 minutes until it gradually faded away from the head downwards. All who witnessed described the night as moonless, the yard empty, the window blind down, and the figure seemed to come through the blind and the glass. On December the 16th, 1835, Elizabeth Proctor's sister, Jane Carr, was visiting where the following happened. A little before 12 o'clock at night, Jane Carr and her bedfellow were disturbed by a noise similar to the winding up of a clock, apparently on the stairs where the clock stands, which continued for the space of 10 minutes. When that ceased, footsteps were heard in the above room, which was unoccupied for about a quarter of an hour. While this was going on, the bed was felt to shake, and Jane distinctly heard the sound of a sack falling on the floor. Then on the 31st of January 1836, Jane described the following. About 12 o'clock at night, being quite awake, was disturbed by a noise similar to a person knocking quickly and strongly on a piece of board in the room. When that ceased, she distinctly heard the sound of a footstep close by the side of the bed. On February the 21st, 1836, Mrs. Proctor, who was not sleeping with her husband, but sharing her bed with the children's nurse called Pollard, as they were lying in bed, they were raised up and let down 3 times, as if a man was underneath the bed pushing it up with his back. Proctor's son also experienced his crib being raised up several times, and was so frightened that he called out for a light. 2 years later, in 1838, Jane Carr was again visiting, but was too terrified to spend the night alone, and shared her bed with the cook, Mary Young. Things quickly took a terrifying turn when sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, Mary Young heard the bolt of the door of their room slide back. Steps then approached the dressing table where a candle was burning. The light was obscured as if the figure had extinguished it. Jane Carr then felt the bedclothes raised over her twice, then they both heard something rustling the curtains as it went around the bed. Mary Young claimed she saw a dark figure on the outside of the curtains. Jane heard and felt a sound like a fist hitting the headboard on her side. Mary Young then felt pressure on the bed and saw the curtains pressed inwards before they both heard it leave the room without shutting the door. The following morning they found the door bolted. Whilst the terrifying disturbance was taking place, Jane Carr had kept her head hidden under the bedclothes. The children also experienced paranormal activity, where Joseph Jr. experienced disembodied voices saying things like, "Never mind," and "Come and get." He also appears to have haunted himself, as he claimed to have seen his own image staring back at him on one occasion. Other strange experiences included disembodied white faces and a female apparition with hollow eye sockets. By 1847, the Proctor family had finally had enough and moved to North Shields, but the disturbing entity gave them one last performance the night before they left, where they heard banging and dragging of boxes down the stairs. It was as if the ghost was planning to move house with them. Fortunately, their new home was quiet. Joseph Proctor died in 1875 and his son Edmund found the diary amongst the papers. The notes in his diary had ended abruptly in August 1842, where it appears there may have been missing pages, which could have shown further proof that the events were supernatural. Edmund submitted the diary to the Journal for Psychical Research, which was published in their 1891-1892 edition.